So Tammy, why don't you kind of talk about your Regus background and kind of how you got to CoStar, and then even how you've decided to kind of create this niche within CoStar and kind of wiggle your way into that national role without really having a national role.
That's a great place to start. So to give you a little bit of background, I have a Regus history. I think many of us in co-working that have been doing this for a while seem to have that connection. And I do as well. So started with Regus back in 2010 in the Carolinas, and worked there as their, salesperson, boots on the ground, selling 13 of their locations. Did all the roles from that to the center manager, doing the ops and the sales. And then, went on to open up several of their locations throughout the Carolinas and in Southern Virginia. And so that was a great process. And I think that's something that, we all share is just, they are the leader when it comes, to the co-working space. And they've done a lot of great things, in the industry. And I certainly benefited from just learning, the standards that they set throughout. And so part of that was, the transition into identifying what makes a new location that's opening successful. What are those fundamentals that go into making sure that when a co-working space is getting off the ground in a new market, what needs to happen and in the timeline that it needs to happen. So that was part of what I did in those earlier days. And then it was great. But then I transitioned over to CoStar, LoopNet, the data and analytics for commercial real estate. So they're the leading provider of commercial real estate data. And so I transitioned there. And during that transition, LoopNet became really a focus of the business. And, getting and bringing exposure to office space. And when I, was looking at these co-working spaces that were continuing to grow really throughout the country, and how I know, the time frame, and again, going back to those grassroots of making a successful center, day one, and even before day one, combining kind of that knowledge along with LoopNet and CoStar, saying, wow, we really, I need to meet some of these owners, and VentureX happened to be one that I connected with early on in the Carolinas, owner there who had a couple locations. And so, we connected early on, and really, to make a long story short, had some great success utilizing CoStar and LoopNet tools for their co-working space. Enough so that the other, VentureX locations were saying, what are you guys doing over there? We need to know. We want to spread this good practices throughout our other owners and operators. And so, I connected with the corporate office, and then, kind of going into that, just said, how can we spread more of the tools that the training, to these other owner operators, so that we can continue to kind of shrink down that ramp up time that these new locations are looking to do. So how do we maximize exposure on their co-working spaces so that brokers know about them? So we like to be a disruptor in some ways. How can we disrupt what the brokers think about when they think about flexible office space, and who's their go-to? So I try to provide that solution to as many owner operators as possible, so that they get all the exposure in their markets to make them successful very early on.
So question for you. What's the quirkiest part of your personality?
Ooh, do you really want to know this? Quirkiest part of my personality, hands down, is I am one of those people that have an OCD. And if a pencil was one way and I put it this way, I will notice if somebody touched the pencil.
Let the record state that's why I asked the question. I'm just trying to get you to loosen up a little bit.
I got you.
But yeah, I do feel like running a center or a space like attracts people with that conditioned to some extent.
Yeah.
I always say I'm like
Does it?
minor OCD because I'd walk in and be like, the pillow needs to be moved. This
Yes.
needs to, but I always wanted to sort of be able to hire for that, like in some
Mm.
way. I would start to ask my managers things like, what does your bedroom look like at home? Or, like, cause like I wanted somebody else to have that OCD when they walked into the space. I think there's a lot of value in it. So,
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that's honestly how how people service their clients or consumers in a great way, right? Is because you're dead set on delivering what you've promised, and you're going to go above and beyond to do that. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's a quirk, but it's also it can go both ways, right? It's really beneficial to deliver something, and the other part
Yeah.
is often it makes us rigid uh and afraid to be the person that I think people are most embraced by, right? I've gotten a chance to spend a little bit of time with you, and I think that's one of the great things about your personality is you're very inviting, right? And it's because you're willing to help people, right? And so that makes
For sure.
operators, landlords, other vendors willing to basically participate and partner with you or collaborate in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, absolutely.
okay. So Tammy,
I think
what
that,
is it
yeah.
that
Mhm.
Venture X and Office Evolution are doing that everyone else should know about?
Mm. Oh, wow. Well, I
Because
think
well,
that
you
that
mentioned
is,
the tools and like how, I'm guessing like part of it's customer acquisition, broker awareness. Yeah, what,
sure.
without spilling their whatever,
Yeah.
secret sauce you're doing with them,
Yeah.
sort of maybe more macro level, what are the
Okay.
opportunities that you see?
Um, I think in the way that I work with the VentureX and now Office Evolution teams, it's very personal. It's not a one size fits all. I think we know if it's co-working, we're talking about specific markets and locations. We're talking about specific, you know, personalities in the locations. I mean, each location has a personality. So, I think that it's very much like a hands-on and very, custom approach that I take. That I think to what Gio is saying is, I want to help, make them as successful as possible. And I think what VentureX and Office Evolution, I try to give them the tools that maybe they don't know about, they don't know that they have access to, and they're more willing to, be open to this because a lot of them are owner operator. And so they
Very
want to know
entrepreneurial and they
they
want success and
they're
yeah, they're
very
willing to.
vested. They're vested in
Mhm.
these locations. And so they want, their teams to meet with me, via Zoom or however it is, to make sure that they're utilizing, CoStar and LoopNet to the most that they can to get the best results. So I think just connecting with their teams and, keeping that relationship going has been really great for both of us, because it's I'm kind of advising them since I do talk to so many different owners across the country. Is I see best practices, I see what works, what doesn't work. Um, I use a lot of the conversations that I have, and sometimes they're I think it's you even mentioned it before. It's good, bad, and ugly, right? So sometimes there's a little bit of ugly that we talk about, but yeah, I think it's in general, it's just how we come together specifically to them, their location, their market. That's different.
And is that mostly like a marketing tool, or are they using other types of, okay, so more marketing for them to get in front of people who are using CoStar or LoopNet as a search tool?
Yeah, it is. So I help them create their listing on our platform. And I also do a custom market analysis. So I'd say that's a takeaway here. I'll say that again. A custom market analysis that I do with them is very individualized and really brings a lot of insight to, what their listing looks like on our platforms and how to make sure that they're leveraging it by having all the appropriate information in their listing. So, you know, um, those are the kinds of things that I think are valuable to their team, that they know how to access leads that come through our platform. identify, large tenants. We even do a little research to see, if they have a particular tenant they've toured, where do they currently sit, what are they occupying, and what's their lease look like. So we do all kinds of very detailed searches.
So what are the biggest mistakes you see operators make when listing on a platform?
Good question. So I think one thing is that it's underutilized. That's a big mistake. Some of the locations are not even visible on CoStar or LoopNet. We have over 11 million unique visitors that come to our sites every month. That's a lot of people searching for office space, and some co-working spaces aren't even on there. And it's free to add your listing, to our site. So if you were to go to LoopNet and upload your space, then, you can do that. What I try to do is, go a step beyond that and make sure that once your space is added, that then we're saying, okay, do we have the information, there served up so that when a broker's looking for a team space, they know exactly, what you have, or you're making it easy for them to use you. So then I get into more best practices with them. But that's where we kind of overcome some of those common mistakes of, listing out your 100 or 50 offices, that you have. You don't need to do that. That inventory is going to change. We're not going to track it to that level. The biggest thing that's being underutilized is just not having the representation of your space on our sites.
Yeah, and one thing I see come up a lot that I'd love for you to chime in on is the way they list their location on a site by per square foot price, as opposed to for their space, not overall, or putting to be determined, or I don't know what the options are, but
yeah, I mean, that's kind of a common question a lot of times when we're inputting their locations, their listings, is how do we base the rents? How do we talk about what a kind of interior office is versus that team space? And really we don't. We really find that the best practice is just to make sure you're visible, and to make sure that you have maybe flyers that are attached to your listing so that a broker could quickly view large space, interior space, virtual office, meeting rooms, really just, access it more that way, because we're essentially not trying to get them to book a office through our site. We really want to just capture that lead. We want you to be at the top of the list, the most visible, give them the most content to absorb, and then, have them come into tour. That's the goal. So we do leave that as to be determined or negotiable. And then we try to just serve up some other options on like flyers or some other ways.
Tammy, are the listings like a freemium model? Does the operator pay to have certain features, or is that not okay?
Yeah, so very simple. I mean, if you want the free basic listing, you can have that. And that's just very kind of entry level. And then from there, we have different levels of, getting it onto LoopNet, or options to make it, at the top of the search results, or be able to tour it virtually with the 3D Matterports and, some other custom features.
Got it.
And those can have, a cost for that listing associated with it. But I think that, it's looking at first being visible, and then
baseline is like you have to show up, and then
you have to show up.
Let's add on. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
I'm curious, from a macro perspective, you have such a great history in the industry. What are you sort of seeing in terms of a shift around? So it used to be there were probably no co-working spaces on LoopNet. I don't know if Regus, if they were on it, like LoopNet, CoStar was really traditional commercial real estate. So that trend, in addition to there's that piece of it, it's like the two-sided effect. And then brokers even understanding, what am I looking at? How do I translate? If I've got somebody who's looking for space, how do I think about flex as being an option, and them understanding kind of what are they looking for on the platform? What do you,
So,
I think we're still at the beginning of those two
Yeah, I mean, one of the good things I think that's come from, Regis's, presence in the market is they have done a lot of that educating up front to the brokers on what co-working is and flexible office spaces and, what those options look like. And then, CoStar did follow by adding a toggle where, broker can go in and specifically look for co-working space. And then we have that like check the box. But it's funny because I've been on meetings with brokers and we're talking about flexible space options for their clients. And I'll sometimes, especially through, COVID, one of the benefits is Zoom and you get to see, other people's screens. So I've kind of watched how, some brokers will use our platform to look for space. And really that's come out to help me when I'm advising owners and operators how to position their property on our sites. It's like, hey, this is how we're seeing most of the time the brokers doing the searches for co-working. So, I want you to show up on this search result and I want you to show up on this one over here. And this is how we're going to do it. So, so with that, it makes it easier for the brokers to know what co-working is because they're more familiar. I think the one thing to kind of add to that is when, why are brokers even important? Why are we, Giovanni, why are brokers important, right? They're the ones doing the searches for those, enterprise clients we refer to them as, right? They're longer staying, typically paying very, very well and timely.
Larger
They're the ones,
requirements.
larger requirements, right? So they're taking up a good piece of that available space. And so, making sure that that the brokers are finding you and, you're getting that visibility is important, but that they can add you to a tour path, through that CoStar. That's where they live. The brokers live in CoStar. So 96% of brokers use CoStar for office space requirements. So with that high of a, usage from the professional audience, being able to be checked, and added to a tour list just by being in our, database is super valuable.
So what do you like best about serving the operator community?
So I think my heart kind of goes to the investment that they've made. I think that's where, corporate run versus, I guess, and I'm referring to more of the, the franchise model, where, maybe an owner's coming in, they've ran other businesses, they've been successful in business, right? And then they see this as an opportunity to continue to kind of grow their business, their wealth, but it's also, it's a whole different industry. And so there's a lot of education that goes into running a successful co-working location. And so my heart kind of connects with these owners, mostly because of the difficult conversations I've had to have.
Yeah.
I think that's where the spectrum of a location that's maybe taken longer to, look, so many of these opened right when the pandemic was happening, that these guys came in ready to do a fantastic job like they've done in so many other businesses in their life. And then they're opening up a co-working space in the middle of a pandemic. And next thing you know, I mean, they're just like, what in the world, and there's been some difficult conversations. And then, trying to turn those around. Look, how do we make an impact, the greatest impact in the shortest amount of time on their locations? Like that's what I try to do, is just be able to advise them on how to do that.
Yeah, and
But
I've had some.
gratefully, yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Go ahead. Oh, I say, thankfully there's been others who have done, well. They've weathered the storm, they're coming out of it, and they're doing really well, and I'm grateful for those too. I will say there's some, owners and operators that take advice and are ready to, implement, and the others that don't.
Yeah.
So it's all that.
And I mean, and the three of us have that same servant heart, right? Is we want to help these operators do well. And so, I mean, I think that the hardest part is really being able to deliver it in a way that makes sense for that particular operator, right? Because they all receive differently, they all have different perceptions, they all have different backgrounds. And so trying to figure out how to deliver that message in a way that is well received is sometimes the most frustrating, probably, with some of these operators that feel like their way's the right way, but yet there isn't success, or they feel like there's going to be over success with a model that we already have experienced difficulty with through, running a center like yourself, or Jamie advising others, or myself just being able to see spaces across the country. And so I think that's where, again, going back to the connection and the interaction with you, is I sensed your passion to want to help these operators make the right decisions and find success. Because you're right, they're not a corporation, right? It's not a publicly traded deal, whether you're a one location owner, or you're a local or a regional group. I mean, one bad location can sink an entire good operation. So making sure that you're giving yourself all the opportunities to be successful. And, CoStar is just one of those platforms that allows for these operators to be get out and market it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, to what you're saying is, there's, when I'm typically having a conversation with the owners, it's probably not your typical CoStar LoopNet conversation to start off. I ask questions about, how long have you been open? What's your occupancy? Did you hire a team yet? Who are they? What's their background? What kind of offices do you have? Where are you located? I mean, just, all about, because it's so much about, their industry, their market, or the industry and their market. And then once I have, like, some of those fundamentals answered, then we can start talking about, okay, well, what do we need to do to make sure that we have you, positioned in the market, that's going to benefit you the most for where you're at.
Tammy,
And
do you find yourself doing like business consulting along with? I mean, you have so much history and experience.
yeah, I think it does go that way. It just does. And it's a little bit of the business, it's a little bit even of coaching, like, well, when they come into tour, like, I'm having conversations with their business, center managers, saying, okay, well, when they come into tour, tell me a little bit about that. So it doesn't always stay within the CoStar LoopNet. It goes into, like, did you ask, like, how did you hear about us? Or, did you do these certain, best practices that are just known in the industry? And then, oh, by the way, you can utilize our tools to make those even more powerful. So that's where kind of the combination of the co-working background and the CoStar LoopNet really makes our conversations so much more meaningful and rich based on that.
That's awesome. So what is the best way for people to kind of reach out and see what is actually already on the platform? Because some of these operators don't even know where to look, right? So where could they go to kind of see what's out there already, and then kind of what are the next steps from there?
So, I mean, you can go on to loopnet.com, which is going to be website where you can see what co-working spaces are in your market. And if you don't see yourself listed there, then I would advise you to call myself, and you guys can post my information for people to reach out. You can reach out to the, CoStar LoopNet, kind of website and that sort of thing. But most of the time, not to give myself a plug, but, most of the time you're going to connect with a person in the local market that doesn't quite have the same, connections or experience that I do to advise you one way or another. So, my thought is, reach out to myself once we have those kind of initial upfront conversations about your location, your market, and kind of where we see, you best being positioned on our sites. Then I'll loop in the local person to continue to help service and make sure that we're giving you, the best service that we can. But they can email me or reach me directly. Do you want me to, you guys can post it or whatever.
We will, yes, we
yeah.
will post it for anybody who's listening. If you open your podcast player, we always put notes in the description of the episode. And so you can grab, Tammy, feel free to say it out loud for anybody who will remember it. We'll also post it in there so people can easily access it.
So you can just email me at tsmith, number 5, at CoStar.com.
Wait,
so
are there 4 other T Smiths?
I have yet to meet another T Smith, but apparently I just have to wait in line of the historical T Smiths that existed at CoStar. So
that's hilarious.
Could be Tim, Tom, but I'm Tammy. Yeah. So Tammy Smith at CoStar. So yes, you can reach out to me and we can set up a consult, Zoom call and, kind of go from there. One thing I'll mention and is that through these conversations that I have with owners and operators throughout the country, and I'm curious to get actually your thoughts or take on this. I have a specific owner operator who is looking at kind of a different model for co-working. So I'm curious to get your thoughts. So his idea is to buy a building and make floors of Airbnb, floors of like kind of the retail, ground retail with like coffee, nice wine tapas, whatever on grocery. So that's on the main floor, the Airbnb and then co-working space all within the building. So that is supposedly in more of like markets, like Miami, who get more international travelers so that they can capture the, where they stay, where they eat, and then where they work. Well,
I have a friend who lives down the street and she's investing in some condos in Tulum in Mexico. And she went down to see them and they're still under development. And she came back and she's like, hey, there's co-working on the whole first floor. And I started peppering her with questions. I was like, who's operating it? Is it the building? Is it an operator? Is it? So the condos would be short-term rental. So Airbnb or whatever platform. Mm-hmm. She did not mention other retail, but it was, to your point, like more of a destination location for like the digital nomad or, just anybody who's, on vacation and still wants a professional place to work without having to go whatever back to their, STR or just community if you're there for, a couple of weeks. So I think it's super interesting if the building is zoned that way, because I'm just thinking about like in Chicago. I remember when I opened my first space, I was like, okay, what's my backup plan? And I knew, I couldn't get zoned for short-term rental in the building. So if you can get zoned for it, I think the sort of mixed use, like all in one, is super interesting, especially like in today's culture of you can work from anywhere. So Gio, what do you think?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, Amy King, who we had on, actually has Airbnbs inside or above her space.
Yep.
Right. And she talks about how they actually add a lot to the community and everything else. I mean, I guess part of me would say I think there's liability that comes with all that, right? Is having people that are nomadic coming through the space, if you will. But at the same time, I think it adds a lot of culture and vibe, and it really depends where and what. And I think that the good old Simon Sinek question is always one that I kind of go back to with these interactions is, what's your why, right? Why are you trying to do that? Why do you think that's a good idea? And because, I mean, most of us a lot of those things are based off of experiences that we've personally had. And, I think that part's big. I mean, I'm sure Jamie, your friend in Tulum, has probably experienced the need to have office space or to have a meeting space or whatever when we're down there. I mean, this is a perfect example, right? We haven't said it, but I'm actually in Cabo and I'm up in my hotel room, right? And it'd be great to be in a co-working space downstairs or down the street or whatever, as opposed to in this hotel room. doing this, where I was sure the Wi-Fi would work. It'd be a lot more professional environment, everything else. And so I just think with the current world we live under, with people being on the move and being able to have a work-life balance, that we can do that, and there is a need. But it's the implementation that would be my concern more than the viability of the use.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, ultimately, I think that would be like the best scenario where, I can work remote, but I still want to be in an office, but I want to check out new markets and have all the flexibility that we all want.
Yeah, or
For
like you're
sure.
taking the kids, I don't know if you have kids, but like, spring break, that's always I'm like, you have another break? Really? Another one?
Right.
And I want to
Like, do you
go
go to
somewhere,
school?
but right.
Yeah.
But it's,
Yeah.
I can only take so much, time, but to be able to blend it a little more where it's like, yeah, I can
Yeah.
go be in the mindset of like being at work, but then we can go to the beach, in the afternoon. I kind of, yeah, I like the mix there. I also just think we're at the very beginning of so many sort of creative manifestations of what people will do with flexible
Mm.
space.
Yeah.
So I bet you'll start to see a lot of variations come
Yeah.
through.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think so. It'll be interesting to kind of see how this evolves. And, I think that's what's interesting is, where I'm seeing the request and the need for, getting these new locations. I met recently with an owner here in our market, and he is doing all of these like kind of smaller footprint, um, in tertiary markets. So, his requirements like to be in a downtown where it's very walkable and, but he doesn't want to take up a ton of space and, just interesting to see the different styles of flexible space that rolling out, it surely does not seem to be slowing down. I'll say that.
As a former Regis person, did you quiz him on his pro forma? Did you want to like?
Yeah, I wanted to. I was like, so how do you handle this? And what are you doing about this? And how long have you been open?
Yeah.
What's your free rent look like? Is there any? Then
Yeah.
I got to stay in my lane though, right?
Right,
Like, I don't
right.
want to,
Yeah.
I got to stay in my lane. Like, all right, I'll stop. But yeah, it's been an interesting perspective or view to get. And I've enjoyed, attending these conferences. Gio and we were just in Denver, like what, a week ago or so. So I mean, that was another really great conference. And I think there's just so many of these the different co-working that are at different places. Some have been around, but maybe haven't really evolved, to what co-working is today. So they are kind of, been doing things the same way for a long time. And so I think, getting the opportunity to share, some of what we see working in more of the newer models of co-working has been really good. And, just pouring into as many of these owner operators. I don't really know what's going to happen, what's going to come of all this. I don't know how it's all going to turn out, but I seem to be planting seeds all over the place, I guess is what I'm saying. We'll
Yeah,
see.
and so sometimes that's what happens, right? Is you create opportunities for yourself, and that's what I see you doing at CoStar, right? My question to you is, why aren't you handling this on a national platform? And I think, the opportunity will continue to rise as more and more people reach out, and there'll be a vertical that's focused strictly on this, just like CoStar now has a button that you can click on co-working spaces, right? And so they clearly see the need, and grateful for everything you're doing in the industry, and your heart of service for people. And it's been great running into you over the last few months. And then I'm just excited to have more operators on the platform to basically market and continue ramping up out of COVID.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that awareness is what, I hope today brings, is just awareness to say, look, we're where the brokers, 96% of brokers are going to find office space. They're coming to CoStar. 11 million visitors are going to LoopNet. we're running a campaign right now, Space for Dreams campaign, where they're investing over $136 million in, marketing to make sure that anyone who is looking for space thinks about LoopNet. And, the biggest mistake is you're not there. When I zoom in on the map and I know that there's a co-working space there, but there's nothing that represents your location, it's just the biggest, waste of an opportunity. So hopefully, today we'll just, anyone who's listening as an owner, operator, center manager, whoever you are, you check on LoopNet. If you're not there, send me an email, reach out. Let's get the ball rolling, because you could be missing out on opportunities. And I see that happen, and so it's really, really one way that you can just, turn things around that doesn't take much effort. Yeah.
Tammy, do you advise the owner operators, if they haven't, when they're initiating a listing, like how to manage a broker program, like how to pay, sort of how to communicate? Because some of them probably don't know, right? And I'm guessing that's one of the kind of easier aspects of working with a franchise group, is they probably have sort of a standard approach. But do you answer those questions when folks are like, okay, how does this work? What do I do if a broker shows up?
Yeah. So, that happens, and they don't always know what a broker expects from them, or how to,
or vice versa, right? Like
Yeah.
for both sides, the broker,
True.
like, well, how do I interact and transact with the operator?
Yeah. So while that's, I'm not the expert necessarily, I don't, I'm advising them on their advertising and listing, but the conversation happens because I do have so many of these conversations about, how to have a broker, add you to their tour path. And if they do, how do you serve up, a couple options for them? How do you make it easy for them? And how do you pay them? And what is meaningful pay to a broker? And so we talk about that, and, and that's part of, I have kind of these short list of best practices, and, the broker commission plan is part of it. And I'll share it with them. And it's not that necessarily I've created it, but I've been able to combine, really what we're seeing working in so many of these markets that, we just share kind of industry knowledge. And then we can, make more deals happen, because in the end, that's what we're trying to do. I'm sure you've heard the phrase butts and seats. I mean, it's we're trying to get butts and seats, and the nature of co-working is you're always in that business of getting more through
customer
the door.
Acquisition business, 100%.
So so it's just, how do we make it attractive for the brokers to want to work with you, and be able to compensate them in a meaningful way. So that's also, what we do for sure. Mm-hmm.
Well, we really, again, appreciate you taking time to spend with us and share with us what you do and what your focus is. And certainly, hope that you keep growing that overall platform there at CoStar that's so helpful for all the operators, landlords, brokers, and even occupiers. So thank you for that.
For sure. Now it's a pleasure to connect with other industry, experts, and be able to share great insight, and certainly I know we'll have opportunities to work, simultaneously with each other and in different aspects. I've already said, you got to call Giovanni for this. This is what he does. So it's so good to connect with you, and I enjoy the podcast. And I totally I was supposed to start this way.
Just putting the beanie on.
Hold on, I
hair
got the
looks so
beanie.
good.
I was supposed to start this way with my sorry, I have the Flex
Love it.
Uncensored beanie going here. So anyways, we'll have lots of opportunities hopefully to connect again in the future, and certainly if I can ever help you all, don't hesitate to reach out.
100%.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tammy.
All right, I'll talk to you all later.